Great perspectives here this morning. So we will begin with our questions. And as I mentioned, when vote starts, we'll just kind of figure it out from there. I want to start my questioning by focusing on Alaska, because none of you have talked about it. And we recognize that when we think about the strength of our natural gas in this country, we've got extraordinary resources down there in the Gulf. We talk about how that is poised to move out in a significant way. Mr. Safos, you recognize the good work of the committee here in moving forward with an expedited process to help facilitate some of these exports. Alaska's sitting up there. We haven't been able to move out on our natural gas pipeline or a way to get our gas to market, but the recognition is that we have an opportunity to be a serious and a substantive contributor in this more global discussion, because our market is not in the lower 48. Our market is Asia. Dr. Hart, you mentioned that one of the challenges when we think about United States natural gas, LNG, going over to China is that it's expensive to move it from the Gulf. The time involved is more considerable than bringing it up from Qatar. If you're bringing it down from Alaska, it's 7 to 9 days is what I'm told. One of the advertising points that we have coming out of Alaska is we don't have any choke points and we don't have any pirates. There is no Strait of Hormuz that we need to worry about. But as Dr. Hart has pointed out, our gas is going to be more expensive, at least right now, given the design of our project, because of the geographic realities that we're dealing with in advancing, whether a gas line or some alternative to move. So I want to talk about ways that Alaska LNG can be more competitive, and I'd ask your views on that, Mr. Safos, and more specific, what do you think about the potential Chinese investment in the project? And then I'd like to go to you, Dr. Hart, for your views on this. It doesn't sound like you're necessarily advocating a ban on LNG imports to China, but you are certainly urging great caution, and I would like your very specific views on the potential Alaska LNG project, because of the agreement that our state signed with China, a memorandum of agreement to buy Alaskan gas. So Mr. Safos and then Dr. Hart.
Thank you, Senator. When I think about Alaska, I think about two challenges. One is getting the permits, and the second is getting the math to work.
Right.
So
We're working on the permit part.
I'm very hardened on the permit, and I think there's a tremendous amount of work that has happened on that front. I think the economics in reality are very difficult. In 2012, when the oil companies proposed to the state to jointly develop this project, this was a very different LNG market. The market has changed. I think there's a sort of very narrow commercial window in which this project can be successful. I expect to see...
How narrow do you define? I won't hold you to it, but I'm curious to know how much time you think, given all that is happening globally.
I apologize. I don't mean time.
Okay.
The window of time always moves. So that's...
Fair enough.
The window that I'm talking about is the commercial margin. Can you make money delivering this gas to Asia? And as you know very well, Alaska's challenges are in part the gas has a lot of CO2, very long pipeline, and those are the two main things that challenge the competitiveness of the project. So I look forward to seeing what the new governor kind of puts forward in terms of how to structure this project. I think there's a structure that can work. My view, having worked on the Alaska project in a previous capacity, has been that there's a role for the state to take a leadership position as long as the risk and the reward are appropriately distributed. Which brings me to my comment on China. The concerns that I've had in the past about possible Chinese involvement in the project has been that the structures that were discussed put a lot of risk on the state maybe, and the Chinese weren't bearing as much of the risk. So I think a successful model has to find a way for everyone to bear their fair share of risk, and not for the project to be made possible by one party taking a disproportionate amount of risk.
Dr. Hart.
Thank you very much for the question. As I understand the Alaska project, there is a preliminary agreement between the state of Alaska and 3 Chinese state-owned enterprises. That would be Sinopec, China Investment Corp., and Bank of China. As I understand the project, the Chinese firms would, in theory, bankroll the pipeline infrastructure in Alaska in exchange for guaranteed access to 75% of the gas produced over the lifetime of the project. I have a few concerns. I'll outline some of my concerns about that. The first is that these are state-owned enterprises. They answer to the Chinese Communist Party. They answer to China's national interests. Right now, as part of the U.S.-China trade war, we see how the Chinese Communist Party is leveraging American business, American state, American worker dependence on the Chinese economy, on Chinese market access, in a bid to bring the U.S. to heel and pressure the U.S. to back off. Personally, I do not agree with the way that the United States is pursuing its trade interests right now, but it is an opportunity to watch China use the levers that it perceives it has over the United States, and it clearly uses those levers strongly. And so we should be very cautious about allowing a Chinese state-owned enterprise to control that degree of decision-making and financial resources in an American project. Currently, the United States, the U.S. Congress, CFIUS, has allowed Chinese state-owned enterprises to have a minority stake in natural gas projects and oil projects. We have never allowed a state-owned enterprise to have a majority stake in a U.S. natural gas project. So that is something to think about very carefully. Second, my understanding is that multiple commercial oil and gas firms have walked away from that particular project because of the costs required to bring it online. So I would question, why is it that a Chinese state-owned company is willing to pursue a project that individual commercial companies viewed as not commercially feasible? We should have a lot of oversight over, ideally we would have an open bidding process for all development projects in the United States, and those would go to the best commercial bidder. If it wasn't something that was feasible commercially, but it's something that the Chinese Communist Party is willing to invest in, that to me speaks of more interest than commercial ones being involved in the deal. And so that is something that would require very serious U.S. congressional oversight, in my opinion, to make sure that we aren't making a deal that would be bad for the United States over the longer term. Third,
I'm going to have to ask you to wrap here.
Sure. Third, the finances. We would need a lot of oversight over that. We have examples from Sri Lanka and other countries about the risks of being in debt to China for infrastructure projects. And then fourth, because of those risks, I think we cannot have too much oversight for investments of that nature.
Well, we probably have some differences here in terms of the role that China would play outside of the financing, but I appreciate your views on it, and I'd like to talk to you a little bit more about it. Let me turn to Senator Manchin.